But anyway, thank you, Neil, for the introduction. I'm happy to be here. This is actually my first time in Minnesota, so I'm excited. Apparently, I brought the nice weather with me. It's still cold to me.
Thank you.
Yeah, I brought the weather from Hawaii to Minnesota, except like 30 degrees cooler, but probably just as warm for you guys by comparison. So anyway, I want to talk a little bit today about politics and market incentives. And as libertarian conservatives, we absolutely understand the value of market incentives. We know how that works. We know that companies seek profits, and that's how they decide whether or not the demand is high enough for them to continue in a certain market. And there are markets in everything, including politics, which is a little funny when you consider the bias that politicians have against us engaging in a free market together without their intervention. But that aside, in politics, for politicians, everything is ultimately a numbers game. They respond to people who have the power to keep them in power, and that's their profit motive. If you want to be influential, you need the ability to give or take away votes. And grassroots activists actually have a lot of clout in this area, but we have to organize correctly. It's important to know our enemies and allies and to treat both accordingly. Now, of course, this is hard sometimes because how do you determine when a politician has sold out? We all draw our lines in the sand somewhere, but I'd like to suggest that a record in which you agree with the vast majority of votes should be elevated over rhetoric that politicians have to use to appeal to voters who, frankly, don't agree with us a lot of the time. People have to be persuaded to our viewpoint, and it's not going to happen overnight, which I've already heard a lot of people here bring up, but it's something that we need to think about and reinforce. A lot of libertarians seem to forget that we're still, politically speaking, in the minority, and winning does require baby steps in the right direction. Now, of course, I'm not considering the fact that politicians do sometimes sell out and that we do need to hold even libertarian-leaning politicians accountable when they make a mistake. That is important. But if you want your opinion to be taken seriously when you do levy that criticism, you need to demonstrate a high level of political commitment so that those people know that you're here to stay and that your opinion should be taken seriously. Why else would a politician even listen to you? Spouting off and declaring, "I won't vote," is precisely how to get a politician to write you off. Think about it. If you say, "I won't vote," and that's your first reaction to everything, the politician that we could otherwise persuade to vote our way with the right pressure is going to look at you and say, "Perfect, you're not voting, I can sell out to my corporate cronies now." That's exactly what they want, for us to not be engaged. The other side of this coin, too, is if there's a liberty-leaning politician and he or she runs for office, they need a base to depend on. If you say, "I'm not voting," the second a libertarian-leaning politician does one minor thing you don't agree with, it's a market incentive. They're going to look at that and say, there's obviously not enough demand for what I'm selling as a liberty-leaning politician, so either I'm going to vote a different way to actually provide a market for the people who do vote, or I'm just going to not run for office, or I'm going to not run again. That's what happens. We need to be the market for these liberty politicians. There are markets in everything. So if you aren't engaged in this political marketplace, if you aren't a consumer willing to buy the message of liberty by transacting with your vote, if you don't provide that demand, don't be shocked when the result is a short supply of politicians who you'd consider voting for. Why would a liberty-minded politician run for office if the people who make up their base are quick to abandon ship when the storms of political reality start to roll in? When you consider how you can have an impact in a system that is clearly stacked against us, what we would do well to remember is that political parties are ultimately empty vessels. They belong to those committed enough to stay engaged and savvy enough to be inclusive yet firm in their principles. Think about how political parties change over time. We all know the Republican and Democratic parties have been vastly different throughout their histories. The GOP started as the party of Lincoln, the party that ended slavery, and has changed in a lot of ways since then. We've had a variety of Republican presidents. Even from a more recent perspective, Eisenhower, Nixon, Reagan, and both Bushes are all extremely different in their own ways. Now, perhaps from the outlook of people at this convention, an era that we should look to is the Goldwater one. We think about being fiscally conservative and socially tolerant, and Goldwater was known for saying things like, the only thing that matters if you want to serve in the military is if you can shoot straight, as kind of a funny reference to, gay individuals serving in the military, which is very different in outlook from what a lot of people consider Republicans to be for historically and today. So it's only fairly recently in the history of the party that kind of the moral majority types have had the say that they do. The Christian rights takeover of the GOP apparatus didn't happen overnight. In fact, it took a lot of hard work, and the type of hard work that you guys are here doing today. It's not necessarily fun, but it is what's required to take over the party. In fact, down in Houston, Texas, where I live, as Neil mentioned, a little over a year ago, our Young Republicans chapter had a debate between a Huckabee Santorum type pastor. No offense to the apparently few people who did vote for them in the straw poll today. I am using that in maybe not the most positive light, but a pastor who was of that variety, and he had a debate with the national president of the more moderate log cabin Republicans group, and that group is known for their support of marriage equality. And the room was filled with mostly young, libertarian-leaning Republicans who, by the way, tend to be who make up my generation, even if they didn't directly come from the liberty movement. So in my opinion, that's a step in the right direction. But anyway, this pastor told us something to the effect of, if you want to take over the party, if those of you who consider yourselves more socially tolerant want the apparatus, he essentially said, come and take it. He was talking about his vision for how the Christian right did get involved, took over kind of in the late Reagan, early Bush era, and said, we took over the party apparatus. If you libertarian-leaning people want us out, vote us out, come take over the party, because that's how it works from the ground up. And he spread that message, and he said, look, I may not agree with you, but I understand that the party is just as much for the taking as it is for me if you want it. And so he said, by all means, I invite you to try and take over. And so, challenge accepted, I think, as far as I'm concerned, and as far as the people in this room are concerned, because those of us who believe in liberty rather than government force can own the GOP with a bit of hard work, especially because I believe the tide is on our side generationally, and establishment types want to win. That's what they care about. If you prove to them the numbers are there, they'll typically go with how they can win, because everyone involved in the GOP knows that undoubtedly in its current state, the party has an image problem, a serious one. Poll after poll shows this, the RNC's autopsy reports show this. There is an image problem even if our principles tend to be positive. So we know this anecdotally too, probably from our own experiences. I know, Neil said I'm originally from Massachusetts. I know Minnesota is a fairly blue state. I'm sure anecdotally you've had maybe people come up to you and say, well, how could you be a Republican? I get that, especially from a lot of people who assume it means being only socially conservative and that's it. People assume you must be some nefarious Rick Santorum type of a person who wants to be involved in everybody's, personal life. But obviously we know it's not always about that. I'm sure, like me, you've probably sat down with people personally and broken through that cliche. I think face-to-face interactions like that can be how we change the party. But you need to demonstrate that to people one-on-one. And in fact, I recently sat down with someone who, for lack of a better term, had a very closed-minded view of Republicans. And she was shocked to hear that there was a contingent of the Republican Party that was more like me, more socially tolerant, more open-minded, more about true limited government and wanting to get rid of cronyism. I find that anytime I talk to liberals, we are almost always on the same page about vision. We want the same things, it's just a matter of they, for some reason, believe government's the answer. And so I think if you come to people with a good faith understanding of being anti-cronyism, I remember when we were talking here, there was one person who said, when we are consistent in our limited government principles, we can reach liberals and others, and I really do believe that's the case. That takeover, though, will require us getting involved in the party and changing that image, and I think we can do it, and I think we have done it, and I think generationally speaking, this is happening. When you think about generational change, Neil mentioned that I work for a group called Generation Opportunity. We're a millennial advocacy group, and what I have found is that polls show that libertarian-leaning people really do dominate the young demographic, even if they don't know what libertarian means. There was actually a poll recently that was released last year from the Reason Foundation, the ones that do Reason magazine. And so what they had found was that young people, to the extent that they say that they're liberal, they actually identify that way for social reasons, not economic ones. And the other really pertinent piece of information I found from that was that young people, when you actually associate the cost of the welfare state to the realities of it, what you see is support for that dropping when you take the theory and put it into reality. And what you find is a generation that's actually fairly libertarian-leaning. Other polls from Pew and the Harvard Institute of Politics bear this out too. They show that my generation is super disillusioned with big institutions generally, including government, yet we're also very civic-minded. And so what you find is a lot of people may not be familiar with the term libertarianism, they may have a negative view of the Republican Party, But parties change so much, generationally speaking, and I really do believe that everyone in this room is changing the GOP in a way that will eventually make it amenable to young people and make it a true party of liberty and really actually be able to be competitive, because on a national scale, we're still in danger of losing. And so what you do here in places like Minnesota, how you build from the ground up, that will matter. So what you're doing here today is important, not just for now, but for the future of the GOP and the country. And also, what you see is that you always hear, the media and talking heads talk about electable moderates. But I actually think that libertarians are the true electable moderates, not John McCain, not Mitt Romney, not, God forbid, Jeb Bush. It's true, we always talk about this concept of an electable moderate, but Americans of all ideologies are fed up with cronyism. They're fed up with politicians that are too weak to go to war. We want true liberty. And I think most people at their core want that. I think even the people who support government intervention do it because they think it will make people's lives freer in a way that might seem foreign to us, but they really do believe it will improve people's lives. But people they're fed up with kind of this whole big government crony type of system, and libertarians are the true electable moderates because we're socially tolerant and fiscally conservative. And the other thing is that the alternatives that Liberty Republicans provide, we fill a market void. That void, especially that young people are looking for. Where are the candidates that don't sell out to corporate interests on either side, that don't go to war on either side? Liberty Republicans are that alternative. People are clamoring for that. There is a demand for that, so Liberty Republicans need to provide that supply. Again, there are markets in everything. And also, the much heralded libertarian moment that people have been talking about, even people in the media, I think it is upon us. And we can squander the opportunity for the libertarian moment by taking our ball and going home whenever something that we don't like happens. Unfortunately, I know that's been touched upon here, and it's been an issue here in Minnesota where people just say, nope, I don't like one thing, I'm not going to be engaged. Again, that's how politicians sell out, when you do not provide that market incentive for them to vote the right way. And the Republican Liberty Caucus has been a leader in engaging people. I'm so glad that there were so many elected representatives here today, because I think that speaks to the fact that you, especially here in Minnesota, have integrated with the party and you have a strong block of Liberty legislators. And the only reason that they are able to get elected and vote the way they do is because they know that you have their back and that you'll build upon that. So that is absolutely crucial. And also, while it's exciting to focus on big elections, especially this year with a certain candidate who may or may not have just won your straw poll, most likely making a bid for the president, I think you also need to take that opportunity to recruit on the local level too. And I think we did do that through the Ron Paul movement. It's not about just winning the presidency, it's about using that national platform to bring people in and take over from the ground up. We've seen progress in that area. Unfortunately, some people have dropped off, and maybe they'll get back involved again for another campaign. That's possible. But I think what your job is once they come in, how do you keep them engaged? And I think you have to inspire people to take over the party from the ground up. But it's also important to be a happy warrior. I don't see taking over the party as necessarily being a hostile takeover, the way maybe some people have done that in the past or want to do it. Everybody knows that if somebody comes at you politely and with a nice attitude, that you're going to have much more luck with them than if someone is screaming at you. I think a lot of the times that seems obvious, but people get so passionate about these issues that they almost lose a sense of human decency. I try my absolute best to assume that people I disagree with are coming from a place of goodness. Not everyone is, but I think you have to assume that when you first deal with people and try to understand the differences rather than assume it's evil, because that way you're integrating into the party positively. And you're also bringing yourself in a position where you can have influence because people will respect you even if your opinions diverge. So that's very, very important. Many more established members of the GOP know that they need us. I have friends, about my age who maybe worked on Ron Paul campaigns and other things, and now they're more involved in the party apparatus in state GOPs with candidates, because candidates approach them and say, you know what, we need you. They see that market demand. They say, we know there's a demand for liberty, we're going to get you involved, and that's how you start to make the GOP more liberty friendly. I think maybe after the Ron Paul campaign, some people said, well, the GOP is not liberty friendly now, so I'm done. Yeah, that's not how it works exactly. It's a long process. The GOP has changed a lot since the Goldwater-Reagan days, again, because like that pastor in Houston said, they took over. Well, guess what? Let's take back over. I know that's what you're doing here today. You need to build your credibility as a grassroots activist who brings people to the table, and then you'll be listened to. some people do wonder, how can you be effective within a corrupt infrastructure without selling out? And it is a tough question, but I think that's why the people in the room today are here. You're the ones who can change that infrastructure, make it more liberty friendly, and in the end, attract better candidates. No politician is going to run for office without a base, just like no company will sell a product without a market. You can either participate as an informed and influential consumer, or opt out, then wonder why everything you're being sold sucks. It's true. Now, I know you're here today because you want to make a difference, and what you're doing today and what you've done in the past is part of that. The question is what you'll do in the future. And the best advice I can give is to be friendly, to get involved, to approach people with a positive attitude, because people aren't going to yield power or change their ways when you're aggressive toward them. It is an old cliche, but you will catch more flies with honey, and it's possible to be nice to those people you disagree with. So I know you're here influencing people. I know there are legislators in here who are already making a difference. I think everyone in this room understands the message, but it is important to bring it to others and to remember that we can make a difference, and that I've already seen so much change since where we were in 2008. I got involved in 2007 in the Ron Paul movement in Boston, and when I look at how much the GOP even has changed since then, it's incredible. Yes, we still have leadership that we might not love, but we have so many more liberty legislators than we used to, and we have so many more people voting the right way than we used to because they understand where the winds are moving. So again, it's a long process. You might not always like the rhetoric that some libertarian-leaning politicians use, but I think at the end of the day, look at their voting records, be there, and hold them accountable in a way that they recognize is useful, because accountability doesn't work when you don't vote. When you write on Facebook, "I'm not voting anymore," you're essentially preaching to a choir of 10 people. No politicians are going to be reading that. They've probably unfriended you at that point. So you really need to go ahead and just use that influence in a correct and useful manner, because I do see the Minnesota RLC doing that. I see other RLC chapters doing that. I see some Tea parties doing it better than others, but no matter what group you're involved in, I think there are some really crucial ways to get involved, take over from the ground up, but also be inclusive. I think sometimes some libertarians have made the mistake of taking over the party and then trying to get everyone else out. Typically, that's not going to work, because whether we like it or not, we do need a big tent. I think the RLC has done a really good job of being a wing of the party, being the liberty wing of the party, and being inclusive and recognizing that the party is broad, but that we can have the most influence. And also, the RLC is going to be the group, I think, that brings in my generation. So thank you for your hard work.